Welcome to the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation podcast series focusing on school safety and security. My name is Kevin Carroll, Executive Director for the DeAngelis Foundation, and throughout this series we will be engaging in informative conversations with local, national, and even internationally recognized experts in school safety. We will be exploring best practices in crisis preparation, response, and recovery, as well as gleaning lessons learned from these remarkable professionals. The Jefco DeAngelis Foundation originated in Jefferson County, Colorado, with a deep passion for and relentless commitment to sharing best practices in school safety and security with first responders, as well as school and school district personnel. We, in partnership with Jefferson County Public Schools, support a one-of-a-kind training facility, the Frank DeAngelis Center for Community Safety. This former elementary school is now a premier training facility which has supported over 6,500 first responders. Our trainings encompass everything from the practical to the tactical, focusing on proven approaches to preparedness, response, and recovery. More can be learned about the training facility, our team of nationally recognized trainers, and the foundation by visiting www.deangeliscenter.org. With that, it's my true pleasure to welcome our guest today, Mr. John McDonald, Executive Director of School Safety for Jefferson County Public Schools.
Thanks, Kevin.
John, we're so pleased to have you with us today to talk about your experience in this very important role, both with the foundation and with Jefferson County Public Schools. You do serve as the Executive Director of School Safety for one of the largest districts in the state of Colorado. How is it that you came to this position?
Wow. Well, about 12 years ago, I was in the middle of a hurricane in Galveston, Texas, and I saw this job posted online. And just before the power went out, I started applying for the position. And I thought, my daughter is going to be attending Columbine High School. And who better than me, my own ego is saying that, to develop a school safety plan that I trust. And having been a longtime Columbine community member, I knew that we had some work to do in the world of school safety in Jeffco, because it was at a time we couldn't even talk about Columbine. We still couldn't have the conversation in our own hallways in the district. It was too raw, too emotional, and the opportunity when I was told about this position just seemed perfect. And frankly, it was my third hurricane that I'd responded to in just a couple of years, and I was tired of water and wanted to get home and be around my kiddo. So applied for the job. I've known Frank DeAngelis, our beloved principal from Columbine, for many years, and talked to him, and he was instrumental. And I've been here now for, it feels like, about 30 years, frankly. We've had a lot of critical events in the district. It's an amazing district, but one that is recognized nationally for some pretty tough crisis events and emergencies and tragedies.
So in getting prepared to walk into such a position in a district like Jeffco, talk about, besides responding to hurricanes, what is your other work and life experience that you bring to this role?
Well, I started my career in the military, joined when I was 17 years old, and then became a police officer in 1990 for the city of Westminster. And from there, transitioned into the private sector, emergency management, and investigation world of the airline and aviation industry, which is what I was doing in 2001 during 9/11. So when I came to Jeffco, brought a lot of those principles that we learned following the Trade Center attacks and the change in aviation industry over to school safety world. There's a lot of connectivity between those two, believe it or not. So that was really important, and it's been an interesting career. In anything I've done in the last 30 years, this job is by far the most rewarding, and it has the most, I think, impact and influence and opportunity and change at a rapid and remarkable pace. The world of school safety is on the front page news all the time,
Every day.
and certainly we're on that front page a lot. So this is really about community work at its very best, and I like that. I like having the opportunity to be that protector for our kids in the community.
Wonderful. So you mentioned that Jeffco's a great school district, great place to be. It also happens to be one of the largest districts in the state with almost 85,000 students, 14,000 employees. That's a big place to protect.
It is.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what your team looks like?
Sure. I can tell you when we started, we had 12 people in the department. When I started, what was so interesting is that between 1999, our Columbine tragedy, and when I started, we had 6 people in my position. They were lasting on average about a year and a half. And the job wears you out. There's no doubt about it. But working in a large organization where you have 120,000 people in schools every day, and that really requires some thoughtful approach. Educators and cops have different ways of speaking in different languages, as we talked about before. And it took me a while to understand the educator mindset. And those are some hard lessons learned, but you got to work at that. You got to build relationships. You got to build trust. And frankly, if you're not willing to protect your educators, just like you're willing to protect your kids, you're not going to be effective. What that means is when something happens in a school, don't leave them standing. Don't leave that principal standing on their own and all alone. You've got to be there as a mission partner with them. Do not let them get hit by the bus. You take the hit for them if you need to or with them. So it's a shared experience, and you fight through it and work through it together so you come out on the other side stronger.
So over time, you've been able to build a different structure or system, right? So what are kind of the components of that system, the types of roles people
today
serve?
We have a patrol division. We have a dispatch division. We have an emergency management department within the school safety department. We have a threat management program and a campus security program under that umbrella as well. It's 140 people right now, which
It's grown quite a bit.
It's grown a lot, and we will probably top out about 168 based on our current projections. And that really will provide us the layers of security that are required for 21st century learners. They deserve 21st century safety and security in schools.
So let's talk a little bit about those learners. What is it that they see? You run it from the inside, but the average high school student, what do they see as far as your presence goes?
So they see a presence of campus security, primarily in school resource officers. We have a very strong relationship with our law enforcement partners. They're amazing. And they provide us 40 school resource officers every year. They've been doing this for more than 20 years, and it's remarkable. They do it under their budget, on their dime, and in support of our mission.
So at no cost to the school district.
Correct. And that is rare. That is incredibly rare around the country. There's 2 reasons for that. One, the police chiefs and the sheriff have long memories, and they were responders when they first were young police officers to Columbine and to Platte Canyon and to Youth of the Mission. And they've never forgotten those lessons. So they're making sure that they're investing in our school safety. It's also community safety because the relationships that are being built in the schools between kids and cops transition to outside, and we have wonderful community partnerships and relationships between our law enforcement and our kids. And I think that's remarkable. So the students see that primarily. They also see our patrol division, who are constantly in schools. We're in probably 80 schools a day. What they don't see are the other layers that go on behind the scenes of the threat assessment team, the emergency dispatch center that handles 48,000 calls last year.
48,000 in one school year?
Correct. We're a busy bunch, right? Not everything is a threat, but when there's a suspicious person, when there's an alarm that goes off, when there is, anything that concerns our kids, maybe something happened in the community that could impact a school or a child walking home, we're getting those calls. And then we're putting plans and processes in place to make sure the kids are safe.
I understand that dispatch center is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Is
that true?
We never shut down. 3 feet of snow, we're there. And we have cots. We'll have people sleeping there overnight, make sure we're answering calls and monitoring alarms. And you just never know what you're going to get. So,
having been a high school principal in Jeffco, one of the groups of folks that is under your care are also campus supervisors.
Correct.
Talk a little bit about who they are, what they do, how they connect with kids. What role do they serve in this whole puzzle of school safety?
They're the first line of defense, right? They're the kind, caring, trusted adult for our kids. They're the adult that the students see as the campus security, and they are engaging with them every day. Our campus supervisors know the kids by name because they're constantly around them and engaging with them. We love hiring people that really have a passion for school safety, that want to do something to protect kids. And we train them on everything from crisis intervention skills to first aid, CPR. We train them in a number of disciplines that really promote intervention. Now, sometimes they may have to engage in a search of a student, get involved in stopping a fight, but primarily their role is prevention-based. And that's the hard part of what we do is the prevention work. It's frankly fun and easy to create the emergency preparedness model. The ability to respond you have to do that in today's environment. The hard part is the prevention. How do you do prevention well? It's what we've struggled with for years. And it's the key component, because by the time it gets to the response phase, we're already losing because we've had to respond to an event. If we can prevent it from the start, that's the success. And that's the challenge also for us.
That had been my experience as well with campus supervisors, who really are the eyes and the ears, right? And they're with the kids in all different types of circumstances, build those relationships of trust. And then oftentimes kids will feel comfortable coming forward to them and saying, hey, I need help with something, or I saw something, and somebody needs to know about it.
They're an intel network. They are an intel network that is able to provide us critical information that allows us to respond faster with more fidelity and more capacity. And I think that's a tremendous benefit for that group.
So you started to talk a little bit about their training. How about what does the training look like for some of your other team members, like your armed or unarmed personnel?
Boy, I made the decision years ago that, I really felt like we owed it to everyone that had been at Columbine High School, that had seen all of our failures, and they were glaring at the time, right? Because we were never prepared for this as a community, as a district, as the law enforcement agencies. This isn't what we practice. The world changed for us in 1999. So I made a commitment when I started here that we were going to create something that people look at and say, this is the gold standard. And that was the mission. It still is the mission every day. And everything that we do goes back to April 20th, 1999. Everything. Every decision point in terms of structure, in terms of training, in terms of building a school safety program that makes a difference has to go back to that day, because you cannot forget what we lost and what our students who survived went through and what the families went through. So it was with that in mind that we said we have to rethink how we are protecting our kids. We have to rethink how we're being good community partners. And everything changed with that mindset. So we bring in high-quality trainers from the outside because we don't necessarily have all that skill set. And we have Dr. John Nicoletti, who works with us on the threat management side and the threat assessment piece. We have Deputy Chief A.J. DeAngelis, who is one of the nation's tactical leaders and has responded to more school shootings than anybody I know. And they bring their expertise to us, and they're training our teams constantly. And it is the practical to the tactical. Mm-hmm. And we believe in all forms of this. So we spend a lot of time preparing and planning and practicing and training for those critical events. And we train as hard as any law enforcement agency does.
I was going to ask that question. The level of rigor that you expect of your armed personnel, what criteria do you hold them
so we
to?
start with an oral board. If you want to be an Armed Department of School Safety Patrol officer in this district, you're going to go through an oral board. You're going to go through a psych assessment. You're going to go through a virtual it's a virtual shoot house that looks at your ability to make good decisions rapidly under stress. From there, you have to do a physical fitness exam, and then from there, you have to get a 40-hour post peace officer standards and training firearms course that our trainers come in, train everybody on, and then you have to do 3 active shooter training courses every year in order to just stay qualified. And in addition to that, we teach what's called PPCT, arrest control. But our mindset is not arresting kids. In fact, we put in some very, very few kids. I think only 4 in the last several years. That's really not what we're focused on. We can de-escalate, and that's what we're really training is how to de-escalate. And we spend a significant amount of time training on de-escalation techniques. And we go and recruit quality law enforcement people, prior military people that have the experience in de-escalation and are really good at it to come in. I'd rather have a good decision maker than anything else in our department. If you're a good decision maker, you've got a great opportunity to be successful with us.
So let's go back to something you started to mention at the beginning of our conversation, and that was that law enforcement and educators don't always speak the same language.
I'm a mediator.
Talk about the complications that arise from that and what you've decided to do about that.
Well, it is a challenge. Sometimes your school resource officer, your principal, are at loggerheads. They just do not see eye to eye. Give an example. The other day we had a student that blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. The student said, it's just from the cough syrup I had. School resource officer knows better. Education side, they're like, well, it could be. I mean, because our educators think the best of our kids.
Absolutely.
And that's what we want. I mean, that's what I love about educators. They're truly glass half full people. And then you got our school resource officer or cops are like, yeah, this isn't right. This is not accurate. And so sometimes when they're talking, they're looking at the world differently and they look at the student differently. And my job is mediation. A lot of mediation and bridging conversation and making sure that everybody sees each other's perspective. And then we're focusing on what's best for the student and what's needed. And don't get me wrong, we have school resource officers that, they're wonderful with the kids. They're amazing. But sometimes you got to have accountability. And when student safety is at risk and you get a kid in crisis because his blood alcohol level is 3 times the legal limit, we got to do some work. And that's how the SRO is looking at the world. And so it's really been unique because I'll get calls from both groups saying, you need to do something about this person. talk to me about the issue. I never imagined that this role would be as much about that as it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the beauty of it is we have been able to build capacity and relationships. And some of the best relationships in crisis I've ever seen are the principal and the SRO who have worked together for a long time. And they know each other so well. They know what each other is supposed to do. And in a crisis, they're a seamless team working together. And there's nothing better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we really see is we start from this differences in how we view the world. And then when an incident occurs, you see a team come together.
Come together around that common purpose,
what we
right?
want. That's the success.
Yeah. So you've brought someone onto your team to help with that navigation as well. Can you talk about that role?
Gosh, I brought a few people on this year that are really interesting, and I'm a believer that we got to think outside the box. I really have this belief, the longer I've been doing this, that nobody has nobody has the ingredients, all the ingredients to fix this. So let's bring the people in that have an understanding and pieces of the puzzle or pieces of the ingredients that we can make this better. So I looked at the world and I said, what am I missing? I need an educator that can understand the first responder world. And I need to be able to train this person so the educator now understands the first responder world, and then they can take it back to the educators and help them understand it better. So I went out and recruited a principal who has a family that's a law enforcement family, and I brought him in. We trained him to be a first responder. Now he works both sides, and he can walk that balance beam, and he can share the principal lens. Now he understands the first responder lens because he's been responding with us for over a year to critical incidents. So the world has opened up for him, and now he can share his perspective with different groups, and they now, because he's a long-time trusted person in their world, they now understand what he's saying and what he's seeing, and they believe it, and they're responding to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful. Hired a young woman for our emergency management team who's a Jeffco grad, and graduated from University of Colorado as the student body president, and wonderful young woman. And she's starting her career in California and ends up in a mass shooting that she survived at a bar in California that became worldwide, Thousand Oaks. And she's now training our kids and having conversations with them about her experience, and they're buying into what she's saying because she's young enough to be that millennial in front of them, and she's speaking truth to them, and they're taking her seriously as they should, and our drills have become more effective because of her. And then most recently, I just hired a rock star, a man by the name of Sean Graves, who I've known for several years, and Sean is a Columbine grad from 1999 who was shot multiple times. And he brings a very unique perspective because, when we look at what the impact to these events are to our kids and the lifetime of trauma that it takes to recover, he understands when we talk about the work of recovery, what that looks like. Mm-hmm. He also remembers that day and how we responded. He can provide a lens to our law enforcement and to our Department of School Safety that none of us have. We need that. How do you get better if you don't have those perspectives in your world? So thinking outside the box, what can we bring in that makes us better and makes us more relevant and provides a team that's more well-rounded?
So life experience matters, and the ability to translate. One of the biggest things I see as a difference between law enforcement decision-making structures and educator structures. Educators tend to have a little bit more time to build things and work in a consensus-type model. And when we're talking about law enforcement who are responding to a crisis event, it's more of a command structure. So I absolutely can understand the need for a translator between those two.
It's great. I'll just share this really quick. That my good friend John Michael Keyes Mobile, I love you guys foundation. Often says that, if a sergeant asks a cop to do something, the cop says yes sir, yes ma'am, and they're doing it. Because that's the world you live in. That's the command structure. In the educational world, as a principal, if you ask a teacher to do something, the teacher says, why? How come? Can I process that for a while? No, you can't process. We have to make a decision,
we need to go,
right?
yeah.
So we're in the decision-making business. And everything that we do is fast, right? It's thoughtful, but responsive and immediate, because the goal is identify the problem, find a solution right now, and then the hard work. The hard work is the work that you've been doing for the last few years, which is the recovery piece, the long-term recovery. That is always the hardest of work that we will ever do, and it takes the most amount of energy, and it takes the most amount of emotion, and it's exhausting.
Well, and how many times have we had to learn that the pieces need to fit together?
They do.
You cannot operate in isolation from one another.
And it's the single biggest thing I think I see around the country. So many are operating in silos yet. There's a law enforcement silo. There's an education silo. There's a state silo, and there's a federal silo, and everybody is working their own stuff, and nobody is talking to each other. I think that's really what I may be most proud of in the work that we've been doing, is that we're breaking down silos. And when somebody tries to build a silo, we're breaking through the walls of that silo fast.
It reminds me of times when I've had the opportunity to talk with you about mindsets. And so speak about that a little bit, the critical mindsets for each of those components, each of those pieces of the puzzle that sometimes you see missing when you do go and support in.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One, we continually see school districts and saying it's not going to happen here. It won't happen here. It can happen here. It can, it will, it does. So get your head out of the sand. Live in a world where when a threat is made, you believe the threat, because every threat matters. Every threat matters because every child matters. And if we truly believe in keeping our kids safe, then you'll take every threat seriously. I got to tell you, a threat came in last night, late yesterday afternoon, actually. A 4-year-old preschool student threatened this teacher, threatened to bring a gun to school and shoot the teacher. That's a 4-year-old preschool. That's the youngest threat we've ever had. Now, my first thought was it's a 4-year-old. But in my career, I've had to take a gun off of a 5-year-old. So, in the world we're living in, we got to take this seriously. We've never done a threat assessment on a 4-year-old, but we got to figure out. We're about to do a threat assessment, because I want to understand where the 4-year-old gets the concept. Where is this learned at that age that you can make that kind of comment in a school? And we're going to get to the bottom of that and figure it out and put safety plans in place if we need to. Now, I don't know that safety plan for a 4-year-old is a lot different than a high school kid.
Right.
But the premise is the same. You make the threat, we're going to respond. If you say you're going to shoot me, if you say you're going to blow us up, if you say you're going to attack us, we believe you, and we're going to be on your doorstep.
One of the experts that you said we turn to regularly, both the foundation and the school district, is Dr. Nicoletti. I've heard him more than once say probably one of the most dangerous words to hear in any type of threat work is the word just.
Yeah.
Just a 4-year-old.
Right.
Just kidding. Just angry that day.
Yep.
Just.
Because that's when the key piece is missed, and you've just mitigated the issue, or you haven't mitigated the issue. You just reduced the threat in your own mind. You've just said, this is not an issue. This is not a concern for us. And when you say just, it changes something in your mind, and you no longer put the effort into it that you should. Dr. Nicoletti is, I kid you not, a national treasure. He is remarkable and has done so much to protect schools around the country. We're incredibly lucky to have him here in the metro area.
So, in that vein of trying to protect schools and school districts and provide support for law enforcement as they get ready to partner with school districts on this important work, you had a brainchild that has turned into the Frank DeAngelis Center for Community Safety. Can you talk a little bit about the center and how that came to be?
Cops love to train in schools. And schools today operate from about 6 a.m. until 10 o'clock at night, continually. So there's limited opportunity for training to occur in schools. Maybe in the summer, every once in a while, you can get them in. But we have 8 agencies, 8 law enforcement agencies that we support.
Just Jeffco.
Just Jeffco. Plus, you get State Patrol and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and others that want to train in schools. And it just became harder and harder. We shut down a school in 2011 that didn't have a population to support it. And the building sat empty for several years. And I had just gotten a call from A.J. DeAndrea asking again for a school to train. I just happened to be driving by the school. I looked over at it and said, "Oh, I wonder if I can requisition a whole school for the training center." And I'm a big believer that, if you don't ask, you can't be told no, right? So I went to my boss and I told him, to his credit, he didn't throw me out of his office. He asked me how much money I thought I'd need, and we came up with a number, and I said, can I get $150,000? Which at the time we were in a budget crisis. And so it was a leap of faith for the school board to sign off on it. But I had this concept that we could provide this school and turn it into a training center and bring law enforcement in to train, to prepare to respond to our critical events and be better at responding than we were in the past. And we could work together with them. We could learn from them, and we'd provide them this place. Well, we walked in, the place was a cobweb. I mean, the water's off.
Some work to do to get it ready.
It is a mess. So we really cleaned it up. We created it and transitioned it to a training center. And then we got a grant from the state of Colorado for $500,000. And we invested that money into the center. And today it has technology that nobody else in the country has. And it's remarkable. We have an audio system that recreates 40 different sounds of an active shooter environment. We have smoke machines that fill the building with smoke. We have strobes that replicate fire, alarms going off. We have the sounds of alarms occurring. We can push a button and gunshot sound throughout the building. We're adding a scent machine, which is terrible to say, but the scent of urine, the scent of blood, we can put in the school if law enforcement wants to recreate or create those scents, sounds, and visuals that you can't find anywhere else. You can't really get the quality of training you need without that. So since we started this just a few years ago, it's really grown. And in fact, we're booking out now into December of 2020. So we're booking a year out in advance. It's hard for us to even get in the place and train now.
Sure.
And it's our center. So it's really pretty exciting that we've been able to host over 6,800 law enforcement officers. We've had Navy SEALs train there, FBI, SWAT from around the country, air marshals, DEA agents. We welcome every law enforcement agency in because you could be the one that's responding to our critical event or another school district's event. And we want you to have the skill set to do it right.
The DeAngelis Foundation is committed to continuing to support this work because it is so critical. And that's part of my personal commitment. When I was a principal, I wanted first responders and law enforcement folks to be in my buildings and doing the training there because there are unique barriers and unique strategies and tactics that they have to consider.
Right.
And so while you say you have changed it into a training center, what I appreciated about it too is it's still a school, which is the purpose there.
Right.
And our partners in law enforcement have to come into a very stressful, unique environment when we're talking about supporting our kids.
Yeah.
and teachers. And so to be able to reenact those things, it's something you can't do at a regular shooting range.
No, and you walk into a classroom at that training center, and it's set up as an elementary, as a preschool, as a middle school, as high school classrooms. So you get a whole variation. And then our amazing Jeffco PTA president was collecting backpacks for us. And we had, moms gathering lunch buckets for us and lunch boxes. And so we've got them in the center now.
Better.
So when cops walk in or they enter tactically, the first thing they see is coats and backpacks that belong to students, and it's replicating the environment. Where are the kids, and how do you use your tactics to search for that threat and stop that threat?
So let's shift away from Jeffco just for a little bit. And you, based on your role and experience and the fact that you're in Jeffco, you're often turned to by districts across the state or across the nation to assist with crisis preparedness and response. But many of these districts are much smaller than Jeffco. What are some unique elements and challenges that smaller districts have to think through, and what advice do you have for them?
Well, that's a really good question. So a lot of the districts that I consult with, work with around the country, and I do this on my vacation time. So I'm all in. They don't have the resources. They don't have the ability to reach across and have that school resource officer in their building all the time. But there are things that they can do. And so much of it is about developing relationships with local people that can become their mission partner. And I think that's really important. And when I was supporting Parkland, and I met with their cabinet following their tragedy, one of the questions that they asked at the time was, who do we turn to help us manage this crisis? And it was a great question because there was really nobody out there doing that work. Well, that's where Safe and Sound came in. In conversations with Michelle Gay, there was an understanding and realization that we do have this group around the country that has responded to many, many critical events and tragedies, and we do know how to manage and lead recovery efforts, and we can help with that. And so Safe and Sound has become a conduit for that and helping identify the people that can come in and help districts who've had critical events. And I think that's huge because, we do a lot to train our schools, but what we don't do is train leadership. We don't train school boards. We don't train superintendents. So in terms of crisis management, so they know who to turn to and where to go. And they're often left alone and without the experience or the knowledge about the resources that are available. So, I look at small districts, and they have fewer students, but they have much fewer resources. And, a threat assessment may be pretty normal for us to do. For a small district, they may do 2 or 3 a year, or we're doing several hundred a year. So just in terms of capacity to work the problem.
So what we know is that school safety really is community safety, and it takes all of the components of the community to make that happen. These are our kids as a community. And as a principal, I used to share with parents all the time, if a student is in school every day, never gone, never absent, never on a field trip, they are only with us 13% of their time. And we do a lot with that 13%, but we have to understand that while oftentimes a school is the heart of a community, we are a part of the community when it comes to supporting our kids. And I can't think of anything more critical than protecting our kids as a community. So community mental health, law enforcement, any other fire resources that are out there, that partnership matters.
Well, and I'll say this, that, for many, many years, schools were places of reading, writing, and arithmetic. That was the focus. No more, right? That's still there, obviously. It's a core component. That's still the mission. But we are also now the home of social emotional support for kids.
And medical support in
and
many
medical
ways through our
support,
nursing
and
teams.
we are there. We're the protector and the defender, and we are acting so much more capacity than reading, writing, arithmetic. But when you look at school funding, we're still funding the reading, writing, arithmetic, but now school safety and social emotional support and all the costs associated with that are cutting into the educational dollars. We're all competing for the same educational dollar, and it's not going as far. I mean, even in my last 12 years here, I have seen a significant shift in our district and around the country in terms of the cost of treating the whole child and making sure that they have the supports needed to just get educated. And yet nobody is considering what that cost is and how we're able to do that long term. And boy, that's a challenge we're going to have to figure out as a society pretty quick.
Sure. You had mentioned earlier about the threat assessment team that you have in place. Regardless of a school district size, it's important to really have a thoughtful and thorough process around threat assessment and threat management. Can you speak to what are some of the gaps that you sometimes see in different places?
We see a threat assessment in isolation, meaning school districts have assigned this work to one person.
Typically like a mental health person,
correct.
Psychologist.
And not a multidisciplinary team. Look, if you are going to have to do threat assessments, and you are, because that's the world we're living in, you've got to have a multidisciplinary team. It cannot be one person doing all this work. You have to have a team that comes in, and it has to be your law enforcement partner. We have our district attorney's office as well, your county mental health, as well as the school district. We don't do a threat assessment without the parents and the student that's involved either, but they have to be a part of this. And then we have to share that information and make sure that everybody knows, because if the student's on your radar, he better be on the radar of every other
Everybody
adult.
else. Because they're in that community too, right?
Right. And we just don't see around the country the effort maybe that we see in districts that have experienced tragedy. Maybe you have to experience it to understand or to build a team of that type of capacity. But I think there's opportunity for it. And I would like to see more districts engage in that work. And it really requires just bringing mission partners together. Call your local police chief up, call your mental health agency up, call your district attorney's office in, get everybody together, sit down and talk about creating this team together and what are the resources they can provide, because they're looking at the world differently. They're bringing different intel to the table. What we see in a school is one snapshot of that student. Law enforcement may have a whole nother snapshot of it, of that student's life. And the DA's office might, and mental health might, Child Protective Services. All those partners together, that's your opportunity to really make the difference, to do an intervention at the earliest moment to stop the threat that's coming.
Prevention is priceless.
You can't put a price on it.
Prevention is priceless. So talk a little bit about, some folks look at threat assessment and don't always go that next step. The so what, the threat management piece of it.
Well, Dr. Nicoletti's been telling me for years, and I believe him because he's a smart man and he knows his business, that just because you do a threat assessment doesn't stop the threat, right? You've identified the threat. You've identified the risk. Now what are you going to do? Now you got to put safety plans in place. Well, who's going to hold them accountable? They better stay on your radar. So who's monitoring these students? And what happens if you got a senior in high school that makes a threat and now he goes to college next year? Right? Does that threat cease to exist? No. And we've seen that time and time again where the person making the threat comes back a year or 2, 3 years later. So we have a team that monitors social media for students that are engaging in making threats or engaged in attack behavior. We're monitoring their life. We're calling them. We're calling their parents, checking on them. We're doing case management, finding out how things are going. And we can, as we talk to them, we start learning more about the student and what's happening, and we hear about their successes, or we may hear about their frustrations and anger. We understand that, if they've just been arrested, that the student's still not on the right path. We have to be cognizant of all of that.
So the constant monitoring and management reminds me that sometimes people will feel like if a student makes a threat, we just need to suspend them or expel them, and then as long as they're kicked out of the school, then it's taken care of.
Yeah. Well, we know that's not the truth.
Maybe not.
We know that's not the case, and we've seen students come back following that and attack schools. So sometimes we obviously want to get them out of the environment. We need to create a safe space, but then you have to put a plan in place that provides perimeter protection, that provides a layered approach, that we know what our actions are going to be if they come back. If they make a threat online, what are we going to do? Are our law enforcement partners engaged? Have we shared the critical information with them so that when we call and say they're coming, that our cops are here before the person ever gets to our doorstep?
So in your role, today we spent a lot of time talking about school shootings potentially, but people do tend to gravitate towards that vision of school hazards or school issues. Can you speak to a moment about the importance of an all hazards approach?
Oh, gosh. The threat of our time is not just school shooting. The threat of our time is suicidal ideation that's occurring, the cutting that's occurring amongst our kids, the sexting that's going on. The biggest group of sexters we've seen is 7th and 8th grade girls. We've got to get ahead of this stuff and stop it. The threat of our time are the eating disorders that we're seeing in our kids, the behaviors that include fire starting. We've got to address that immediately. The threat of our time, continues to be obviously the threat of school violence. That's a big one. And it's the big, bad, scary one. There's a lot happening in the lives of students every day. The most rapid growing threat that I've seen is vaping. And people say, well, what's the big deal about vaping? Well, if you ask a kid today if they smoke marijuana, they'll tell you no. If you say, do you vape THC? They'll say, well, yeah, how else are you going to do it?
Yeah, that's not smoking marijuana, is it?
And not in their mind. Right?
Or the edibles, right?
Or the edibles.
Same kind of thing.
Oh my gosh, are you? People say, we don't see an increase in juvenile use of marijuana. It's because we're not asking our kids the right questions. Because we've ceased to understand the world that they're living in and how they're using it, and they don't consider this to be a bad thing. I hear all the time from kids, it's just marijuana. What's the big deal? I had a student call me recently after we had confiscated his marijuana at the school, and they had given it to us for destruction. The student called and wanted his marijuana back and asked how he could go about getting it because it wasn't illegal off property, just on school property. And what are the possibilities, because it costs a lot of money. You don't get your dope back. We're not giving you that marijuana. Knock it off. So, there's a lot going on in the lives of our kids. Social media, for all the cool that it brings, really sucks from a school safety standpoint. A majority of threats are made on social media. A majority of bullying is occurring on social media.
Easier to maybe say something online than it is to say something in person. Huh?
You can be an online tough guy pretty easily. Online social media is a threat of our time. There's a lot of threats facing our kids right now. And we are struggling as adults trying to figure this new world out of social media and of this new, online behavior that's changing the world. So there's a lot going on, and it's not just school shootings, but school shootings obviously are pretty final. And we have to do what we can to protect. And we have great partnerships with different groups internally in the district and externally that make a difference every day. And they're every bit as engaged in school safety as our department is.
Great. So, John, we're getting towards the close of our time together today, but is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience today?
believe the threat, right? If you, those little catchphrases, see something, say something, it does make a difference. You are the first line of protection for our kids. So if your kids tell you something, then you bring it to our attention and let us investigate it. Let us work the problem, find the solution. Help us protect your kids. Jefferson County, Colorado has been leading the way in several programs. And one of our newest programs is our school nurse response team. I really wouldn't do us justice today if I didn't talk about how important that's become. School nurses integrating with fire, rescue in times of crisis, and working with our Department of School Safety and Response to critical events. And that is an important group.
So as school nurses, they're actually training as first responder
Correct.
Partners?
Absolutely. And that is a huge opportunity for us. And I think we're going to see that increase around the country. The other thing, and I've just met with our Jeffco PTA, and we're talking about creating the first ever Jeffco PTA response team. And this will be, I think, something that really sets a standard nationally, using PTA to help us in recovery. And there are ways that we can use their expertise.
Are you thinking mostly from the like parent-to-parent connection? Or
Parent-to-parent, but also the PTA as an integral member in helping that school that's been impacted recover. There are things that they can do as an organization that support school safety and that help the teachers and help the staff, help the kids recover that nobody else can do. And we're going to be rolling that program out shortly. So
we'll look forward to hearing more about that. That sounds pretty exciting. So thank you again, John, for your time today and for your daily commitment to keeping kids and staff stay safe in Jefferson County Public Schools. They certainly are lucky to have you leading this important work. This conversation has been brought to you by the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation. More information about the foundation can be found at www.deangeliscenter.org.